I'll introduce more formally James and Chris here in a few minutes. We've got about an hour and 15 minutes, I believe, to talk through what I think is most of our number one asset, and that's people, and how to go out and develop a process to identify, qualify, and attract top talent to our companies. And it was an interesting dialogue I had with James and Chris when we spoke a couple of weeks ago about the presentation. They, in separate phone calls, they both had the exact same comment to me right out of the gate. They said, Neal, you did a nice job covering how to go out there and get people, but how do you keep them? And so what we're going to do is I'm going to give you some framework here and speak for a few minutes, give you some background, give you a little bit of demographics, what's happening out there on the hiring front. And then we're going to engage a little bit in some practices about, how James has done it at Derecktor, or how Chris did it at Rybovich and at Hatteras. And then we're going to turn it over to Chris, and James, I think, will participate as well. And we're going to have an open dialogue about keeping good people, about onboarding and retaining and recognizing high performers and communicating and setting benchmarks, using your employees to engage new employees. So it should be interesting, and so hang on here. Let me just give you some good news to start. I talked to Drew Davala, who's the Vice President of HR at Viking Yachts up in New Jersey. They added 160 employees in January and February, and 180 total in 2014. I spoke to the HR manager at Hinckley up in Trenton, Maine, just a couple of weeks ago. She needs 50 production personnel today to build boats for Hinckley in Maine. Mastercraft called us last week, never worked with Mastercraft before, ski and wake boat builder out of Tennessee, called us up out of the blue. The VP of HR says, Neal, we need a senior electrical engineer. Can you help us? And I said, sure, we can help you. But give me some context. As I'm out there selling this position to prospective candidates, tell me about where you guys have come since the recession. And he said, Neal, in 2009, in February of 2009, we had 109 employees, and today we have 478. And that's what I saw as a recruiter happening across the industry during the recession. In 2009, the NMMA came out with an industry statistic that said that their member companies were at an average of 2/3 of their workforce gone, 2/3 of their annual units built gone, 2/3 of their annual sales gone. And I saw the same thing. Hatteras went from 1,200 down to about 180 people. Hinckley went from 420 down to 80. So it was brutal. But we're back. And you might ask, well, Neal, this is the Superyacht Summit, not the Ski and Wakeboard Summit. What does Mastercraft have to do with my organization? And it's people. Because that senior marine electrical engineer that we're going to hire for them may be one that you were looking to hire as well. That craftsman, that joiner that's going to work for Hinckley may have been your craftsman or joiner. So let's talk a little bit about, again, giving some framework and some context to this. For the first time in 30 years, unemployment fell in every state in 2014. That's awesome news. We added 295,000 jobs in February, and unemployment down to 5.5%. That's the lowest since 2008. Payrolls finally are starting to rise with the unemployment going down, and that's a good thing. I think as an industry, we need to work harder at that, about attracting talent to our industry by paying appropriate wages. All right, let's understand how big our universe is a little bit. Baby boomer generation, about 75 million of them. Average age right now is somewhere between 53 and 69 years old. Okay, those are the folks that are entering into those retirement years right now. It's a big segment of our population. Generation X, the folks that might be coming up next, we've got about 10 million fewer, ages 33 to 52. Those are our next leaders of our companies, managers, vice presidents. And then we talk about Generation Y, or the millennials, 83 million of those. And that's the future of our workforce. And it's a very different workforce than we've ever seen. We hear a lot in our industry about the disappearance of the trades. or the graying of our workforce, and it's absolutely real. When you look at the baby boomers there, 75 million of them, they were brought up in an educational system where typically things like trade shop and auto shop and carpentry, those were required courses in high school, therefore exposing that generation to the trades. Okay? When I came through, they were maybe electives, maybe. Okay? But my generation was all geared towards college prep. That's why we went to high school, because we were going, I never thought about the trades. I think we're starting to see a little bit of reverse of that now. In fact, I know we are, through experiential learning and some of the trade schools that are popping up and the investment in trades workforce. Candidates today are risk adverse. They're coming out of a recession. If they're employed, they're remaining loyal to the company that stuck with them during the recession. They're not as likely to jump ship for an unknown. Okay, they're hunkered down, and they're staying put in. Therefore, they're harder to recruit, and therefore, our traditional recruiting tools, i.e., job postings, aren't as effective. That's the reason we're so busy as a headhunting agency right now, is because companies, just through their own resources, aren't able to find the talent they're looking for, and that's why. Spouses are working, dual income earners. Candidates are underwater on their houses. They can't move, even if they wanted to. The number one reason someone will or will not pursue a new job opportunity has always been relocation, always. And that usually backs up to the family dynamic, kids in school, spouse that works, the housing situation. And now, again, coming out of this recession, and a lot of us lost a lot of value on our homes. We got to wait. We want to build up some of that equity before I can sell my house and move on. Smart companies, and you can read about this all over the place, but smart companies have what I refer to as a talent mindset. And a talent mindset is one that says we're always going to be recruiting top talent. We always have our eyes open for good people. Not when we have a position to fill, but always. And we're going to work real hard, and we're going to talk later about this. We're going to work real hard to hold on to our high performers. Not by throwing money at them necessarily, but things like peer recognition and recognizing high performers. We're going to replace, or as Chris added to this slide, fix marginal performers. We have businesses to run. And I understand that you may have had that individual that's got a lot of tenure with you and been there a long time, but if he or she is holding you back, then you got to make a tough decision. You either fix it or you replace them. Okay, and then there's typically four kinds of messages that people respond to in terms of recruitment. One is to go with a winner. Okay, this is the industry leader, the GEs of the world. Okay, talent are drawn to those types of companies. The second is the big risk, big reward, the startup. We saw a lot of this with the .com. Third, and this one we've seen a lot of recently, is the save the world type of organization. The green technology, the community stewardship, the giving back type organization. And the fourth, and the one that I think really speaks to our industry, is the lifestyle. A company that offers an exciting product, an awesome location, better lifestyle component to the business, and that as an industry, in my opinion, is what we need to sell. That's our sizzle as an industry. Okay, so let's, James Brewer is here with us. James is Director of Business Development at Derecktor Shipyards. They have a yard here, Dania Beach and Mamaroneck, New York. A lot of you know of Derecktor through the Cakewalk Project. James was project lead on that build. He has also experience with Broward Marine and Rybovich. And to James' right here is Chris Miller. Chris and I go back a number of years. I met him when he was Vice President of Human Resources with Hatteras. He was there at Hatteras both when they were privately held and then when they were acquired by Brunswick. So, he gives us kind of both sides at kind of the smaller entrepreneurial organization, and that's certainly what James brings to the table as well. Yet he's been around the large corporate entity that was Brunswick. So let's start. Okay, we've got a position that we need to fill. What do? How do we develop this process? And the first thing we want to do is we need to be able to tell our story. Okay, this is a position description that I took off Monster.com about 5 years, and the only thing I did was sterilize the company name. But this to me just doesn't get me excited about an opportunity. And you see where I highlighted the must-haves and will requires and must-be's. All right, what I did is after I looked at this ad, I jumped over to this company's website, and I went through and I looked at their company history and what they do and what they build and so forth, and I rewrote it. And I'm certainly not going to read this to you right now, but this tells to me a compelling story. It puts me in the setting, and it uses words that sell: high performance, best in class, state of the art. All right, so when you think about where you're going to post jobs or how you're going to post jobs, think about telling a story. It's a wonderful morning meeting exercise to sit around with your management team or even your entire workforce and say, why would somebody want to come to work for us? Why would somebody leave what they're doing today to come to work for us? So I'll start with Chris on that. Chris, I assume when you guys were held by Brunswick, you had some pretty formal position descriptions that you used?
Oh yeah, definitely. My experience has always been, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into the retention piece, is that companies need to differentiate themselves. We're competing for for much of the same resources that are very limited out there, particularly at the most experienced, best performance levels. And if we don't differentiate ourselves from our competitor, we'll never be able to attract those people into our organization. So part of what I think Neal is trying to say here is that when you define yourself, you're not only defining what you are in terms of who you're delivering your products or services to, but you're also defining who you are as an entity and what employees can expect from you and what you're going to deliver back to them in turn. And if you do those things right, guess what? You're going to be the best in class. And telling your story is one thing. Making sure that you're constantly reinforcing that story is another thing altogether.
So at Hatteras, when you guys went to write a position description, was that typically a human resources function? Was it getting the trade managers involved? Who crafted the document, if you will?
It was a combination.
Yeah.
I think I spent a lot of time developing position descriptions, but I had to do it, with a hiring manager and his technical knowledge of that position, which is greater than obviously I would have involvement with, even though I've seen those positions in action.
Mm-hmm. And James, at Derecktor, I know you've got Elizabeth, who serves in an HR capacity in New York. How do you guys typically go about structuring position description?
Well, I think we come back to what Chris just said. It's important that an applicant not have to discern the nature of the company. You have to really identify clearly who you are and what you expect and continue to reinforce that. To define a position, it has to be done the same way. It has to be done clearly and with the input of all the stakeholders, be they a trade foreman, certainly an HR component, but also executive level management has to be part of that process to make sure that the message that you're sending, both with an ad or with a job definition, a job description, is clear and unequivocal in what the expectations are.
We, step 2 of our recruitment process at Brooks Marine Group is to write a compelling job description, and we do that the majority of the time for our clients. They'll send us a job requisition, if you will, and then we spice it up, and we tell this story, and then we send it back to them, and we have sort of a round table, and are we all in agreement that this is who we're looking for? And it's pretty revealing sometimes what will come out of that when you get the stakeholders involved, the peers of the soon-to-be new hired person, certainly the managers and supervisors, human resources, all the way up to the president of the company. The next thing we want to talk a few minutes about is finding some partners out there, some educational partners. And where I see, I think, a huge missed opportunity in our industry is going out there and proactively soliciting a partnership. It's one thing for and I think a lot of it's because we've had bad experiences. You know, Jimmy went to this trade school, came to work for us, and didn't have the skills he needed. How many times have I heard that, right? So, but what are we doing as an industry to go out there and help develop those training programs, right? And participating in those career fairs. And not just having a relationship with the career services advisor for the school or the training program, but with the people who have boots on the ground who are teaching these students. I mean, how many of us have relationships with the guy teaching carpentry at Broward Community College, right? He or she knows best who his best or her best people are, right? So again, every time I call up a school and I say we've got a position to fill, and I understand you teach this trade, I get the same answer almost every time. Send us the description and we'll post it on our job board, right? And I want to go out. No, I want to come to your school and I want to meet your students, or I want them to come here and see what we're doing at our facility. How many of us are embracing, as organizations, promoting internships? I'm a headhunter today because of an internship I did between my junior and senior year in college. And we employ interns year-round at our company. And they help us tremendously. They're younger, they're tech-savvy, they're high energy. We actually go after ones on the local college sailing team because we know they have a passion for boats. And the return on that is huge for us. Apprenticeships, I think one of the breakout sessions today, we're going to focus on apprenticeships, but this, to me, is becoming a bit of a game changer in industry. Did you know that the U.S. Department of Labor has a formal apprenticeship division? And Rhode Island just launched an initiative where we've partnered with them in the state to develop a pre-apprenticeship program. It's now 3 years, we're 3 years into it. Typical class size is about 10 or so apprentices, and we're very picky about who we let into the program, and I think that's important. We've had 4 classes come through thus far. Newport Shipyard, Eli's here. They're a partner in the program, and what we do is we take them through a 5-week process, and we expose them to different careers in the industry. And it's the grunt work. It's the bottom paint. It's washing boats. It's tying up boats. The yard crew. We teach them, so we send them over to the International Yacht Restoration School and give them some hands-on carpentry skills, just basic stuff, just to give them a little bit of exposure. By the way, average age is 19, 20, 21 years old. And of the 4 group classes that we've brought through there so far, we just came out, announced this stat a couple weeks ago, 90% of them were hired upon completion of the program. And so apprenticeships, I think, are something that we're going to start to see a lot more of. I think our industry can do a better job, both through our state trade associations and maybe some of our national trade associations in promoting apprenticeships. And then finally, opening your doors, getting people to come see your facilities, especially young people. When's the last time you invited a high school class to come out and tour your boatyard or your marina or your boat building operation? We talk about getting young people around boats. Chris, tell me some things that you guys were doing at Hatteras to partner either with your local community colleges or trade schools to help grow your own talent.
That was a very unique situation. When I started with Hatteras, we were 165 employees and grew it to, as Neal said, about 1,250 employees in a town that was 35,000 people. Believe me, there's not a lot of carpenters, tradespeople, there's not a lot of professional engineers, there's not a lot of anybody. So any individual that we brought into the organization was typically either coming from outside their community or was being developed internally. And that was the partnerships that we have with the community college. Thank God we had one. And with what was left of the trades programs that the high schools had, disbanded, several years before because of either lack of interest or because the direction that guidance counselors were directing people, their students, towards post-secondary education. And even those individuals that clearly couldn't be successful in a college environment were still being pushed in that direction. So we went into those schools and really partnered with, and we did partner with the guidance people. It was more of an educational process. And it was a little bit of a reality therapy process that not everybody was fit to either go on to the community college system or into a four-year college. So we had to provide the opportunities, but through our own training programs inside our company, the resources that we had available that could go to the high schools to begin to restart their trades programs and partnerships that we had with the community college, by the way, all of which were either funded federally, state, or locally. We had to put very little cost except our time into the infrastructure necessary to be able to sustain a program that would allow us to deliver to us individuals that we could work with and train further and develop on a continual basis. So it was a fight, to say the least, to get the high school to get back engaged with a trade kind of program because they had left it so many years before. Internships, to your point, apprenticeship programs, key. Taking guys out of IYC or other places that have the foundation, the basic foundation that to bring them into places like Ribo or Hatteras or some of the other boat companies, outstanding opportunities, and they do extremely well.
James, you and I spoke about this, and I alluded to you guys a little bit because you guys have tried this and had, frankly, some not great results.
Well, we've had some challenges. Certainly the educational system, as Chris alluded to, has, over the course of the last 20 years, been driving kids towards a four-year degree. And trade schools have fallen by the wayside in their appeal to young people. I think the current cost of a four-year degree is starting to tip the pendulum back in favor of some alternatives. So the current Broward College and McFadder Institute or McFadder Trade School in Davie both have very aggressive and quite well-structured programs for a number of different trades, which serve specialist enterprises like the electrical, marine electrical side and marine electronic side probably better than they serve shipyards, because we're looking for a more general type of employee. I mean, we're looking for welder fabricators, whereas the trade schools teach welding. And a graduate of their welding program is attractive to construction. He's attractive to a number of different facets which don't necessarily feed us. We're looking for somebody who's a little bit more skilled or more exposed than what is currently coming out of the trade schools. That said, we're working very hard with McFadder and Broward College to help make their curriculum more appealing to our industry, and certainly from a shipyard perspective, we're getting some progress there. And internships are a bit of a challenge because it's a seasonal business, and the seasons don't necessarily work for a kid who's in college in Florida, because generally he's free. At the same time, shipyards don't have a lot going on. The apprenticeships, though, certainly that's something we have to explore more diligently. It's certainly an opportunity which was a huge driver of new employees. You alluded to the graying of our workforce, and it's a huge problem, certainly for the shipyard side, because bringing in young people, they have to learn at the shoulder of an experienced tradesman. And as those tradesmen those tradespeople get older, it's really tough to backfeed the cycle. But apprenticeships, I think, if one can find the right candidates, and certainly what's happening in Rhode Island is very, very exciting. I think trying to get that type of process starting in South Florida is certainly a goal we should all be trying to embrace, because it's aggressive, it's successful, it seems to be working really well, partly because you are discerning in the kids you take in, making sure that those kids can succeed and have more than a passing interest in our field.
Yeah, and if you'd like more information on that program and how we set it up and why it's been successful, you can certainly contact Wendy Mackey with the Rhode Island Marine Trades Association. But to reiterate, I'm on the screening committee that meets the applicants. We partner with our local community colleges, our trade schools, our technical schools, and veterans offices. That's where we go to find the bodies, if you will. And then we work very hard to make sure that the person has the right soft skills that we're looking for. And we'll talk more in the presentation about the importance of soft skills. But I want the right individual with the right attitude first, then we can teach them the trade. This picture here is on the back side of my office door up in Newport. I took this a couple of days ago, literally on my way out of the office. This is a letter that a group of preschoolers wrote me last year, and I see it every day in the office, and it means the world to me. We set up a program 3 years ago between Brooks Marine Group, IRIS, which is the boat building school in Newport, and my office happens to be on their campus, Old Port Marine, which runs the local launches and some of the ferries in Newport Harbor, and the Newport Shipyard. And what we do is we invite a group of preschoolers. These are, 4 and 5-year-olds, 5 and 6-year-olds, from one of the local schools. They walk 2 blocks down the hill to the IRIS campus, and we take them up to the North Sales office, and we show them a really cool sailing video, Volvo Ocean Race and Puma and all this stuff. It's about just a 10-minute video, because if you know 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds, you only got so much time to grab their attention. And then we take them down to the boat building school, and we walk them out on the shop floor, and we let them get up close and personal to the boats being built. And then we take them in the back shed where the cornet's being built. And it's hard to see, but the little girl in the upper right is looking up at the cornet, and she's 200-foot long vessel from 1885 that they're rebuilding on the campus of IRIS. Then we walk out back, and the Old Port shuttle picks us up in the launch and gives us a tour of the harbor, and again, gets kids around boats. And it's amazing that living in Newport, how many parents that will come along on this trip say, we've never been out on the water before. Right? We do this every year around May. Yes?
Reinforcing what you're saying through Wendy, Joanne, she asked me to go and talk to the GRRL Tech. That's an organization that's called Girls That Really, Really Love Tech. So 470 kids went to the Rhode Island University, where they are exposed to technical skills, and that's a program in Rhode Island. And I was amazed that these high school girls, from the 50 kids that came over to my workshop to show what I do, none of them took an AutoCAD class, didn't know what SolidWorks was, never made the drawing. And I was in shock. And then I said, welcome to Rhode Island, the state capital of the sailing world, whatever. A lot of those kids, I don't know from what high schools they came, but underprivileged girls, they had no idea. They've never been to Newport. They didn't have access to boats. So it's a national problem, bring those forces into our business. Or are we completely out of the reality? What?
Yeah, well, the idea is let's get young people around boats, and to finish off the story, we do a tour with the preschoolers around Newport Harbor. Then we take them over to Newport Shipyard, and we give them a tour of the yard there and the yachts. And then we order pizza for them, and then we have a little pizza party, then the boat takes them back to Iris, they walk up the hill and go back to school. And we do that every year. And we're starting them at the preschool just to get them around boats. And it's amazing now, 4 years later, I'll see some of these kids, because they go to school with my older daughter, and they, oh, you're the boat guy. Yeah, thanks, that was really cool. And so, again, maybe a little bit of an extreme example of starting them at that age, but the idea is let's get them around boats early on.
Can I just speak to that for a second? Our Marine Industries Association here in South Florida has a plywood boat regatta every year where kids are teamed up with a mentor and given half a dozen sheets of plywood and a few tubes of 5200 and some tie wraps and told to go make a boat. And this they do, and then they race these boats on the next day. And it's high school kids from a number of different programs. Hugely successful. I think this is the 24th year it's going on. We've done it for 2 or 3 years now, and a group of kids from Nova who we mentor has gone from 1 boat to 2 boats now, and it's really illustrative of what you're saying. And those kids are being exposed to boats that wouldn't really have any access to them otherwise. Brought them to the shipyard, and I've seen the shipyard, and it's certainly an exposure that is of great value. So, I congratulate you on what you're doing in Rhode Island, and it's certainly something that every other part of the marine industry can emulate.
So we've built our position description. We've partnered, we hope, with some educational partners and some trade schools to try to source talent. But we've got an immediate need. I need someone experienced, maybe a little more horsepower than somebody just out of trade school. So how do I get the word out that I've got a position open? And my advice is to think about where your target audience is hanging out, typically online. All right? So I try to encourage our clients to stay away from the national job boards that sort of speak to everybody, the monster.coms of the world. Not to say that it's not a resource for you, but really, if I want to hone in on the person I'm looking for, what types of website is that person hanging out on? What kind of trade publication are they reading? Dock Walk, certainly, for the big boat sector. The American Boat Builders and Repairers Association, ABRA, has a job section on their website. But again, for me, posting a job and hoping that the right person will see it versus going out there and doing something like instead, maybe calling ABRA up and saying, hey, ABRA, can I advertise my position in your next monthly newsletter? So therefore, it's arriving in the email box, in the inbox, or on the coffee table at the place that maybe your prospective candidate works. All right, so thinking about proactive ways. Social media has been the game changer in the way we're identifying and talent and the way we're advertising some of these jobs. I used to say that Facebook was kind of reserved for your friends and old college buddies and this sort of thing. I think that's completely changed in the last few years. We have a Facebook page where we do positions alerts twice a week, and we find talent that way. Facebook and social media is also a great way to vet candidates, not just to find them, but to figure out a little bit more about their backgrounds. LinkedIn, LinkedIn has probably changed the way recruiters work more than any other platform that I've seen in the last 18 years. I mean, imagine a situation where today, now I've got your resume basically sitting on a social media site. And with a few extra bucks a month, I can have LinkedIn Premium, and now I can see Ron because he and I are connected on LinkedIn, but I can also see all of Ron's connections and their title and where they work and all of their connections. Okay, so the old days of the headhunter calling in, may I speak to your electrical engineer, please? That's over. We know who we're after now. And so, again, using LinkedIn and maybe having somebody within your organization that's tech savvy enough to be able to help you navigate through this, because it is a little complex, but that's a great way. LinkedIn has also discussion groups, and you can join, I think, up to 20 different groups. Unless you pay a little bit extra, you can join up to 50 groups. And there's probably a couple hundred that cater to our industry. There's the Marine Electricians Group. There's the Marina and Boatyard Group. And basically, it's the social network. But within all these groups, there's jobs. And so I'll start a discussion. If I'm looking for an electrical engineer, I'll go to the electrical engineering group, and I'll start a job discussion. Hey, guys, I'm on the hunt for an electrical engineer for a Northeast Boatyard. You can see more details on careerboat.com. And that's a great way because, again, that way you're not looking for the person who's necessarily looking for a job. If I'm a member of a LinkedIn group, I get emails every day when somebody starts a discussion. So it's arriving, again, in my inbox instead of me having to go out there and look for it. And that's how we promote proactive search versus reactive search. Reactive is I post and I hope the right person applies. Proactive is I post it in the right place and creatively knowing that it's going to arrive on their desk. Craigslist, I told this story to Chris the other day. Craigslist is another one that is often really not looked to as a traditional job board, but it's one of the first places candidates are going these days to look for work. About 2 years ago, I placed a fiberglass repair technician off of Craigslist, and about 2 weeks later, I placed a chief financial officer off of Craigslist. Craigslist is generally free to advertise unless you live in a major metro market. If you're here in South Florida or New York, this sort of thing, they'll charge you $25. Otherwise, it's free. And the cool thing about posting on Craigslist is I told you earlier that relocation is the biggie in whether or not people do or don't decide to pursue a new opportunity. Well, Craigslist, the first thing you have to choose when you search on Craigslist is your location. So you got to know that the job seeker who's finding your ad there either lives in your area or wants to live in your area. Okay, so if I'm going to post a job for the Shipyard on Craigslist, I go to Newport first, and then jobs offered, and then I write the position. All right, so it's free or very cost effective. Your ad is sterilized, meaning typically you're not going to mention maybe who your company is, or they're not going to know where they're sending the email to. So if you get inundated with hundreds and hundreds of applicants, you don't have to necessarily reply. And that's actually, we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but that's actually more commonplace these days than we've ever seen. Is, again, it's a sterile application, candidate click, 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 and it sends away, and I don't necessarily have to reply. So check out Craigslist as a tool. Chris, James, in terms of posting jobs, Chris, was this part of your standard practice at Harris?
Absolutely. The visibility of any open opportunity within your company, just get it out to anybody and everybody possible. And I'll tell you, LinkedIn and some of these search engines have become so powerful that they can go out into all the different websites and look for individuals, or can populate that position in all these what I'll say group-based sites. LinkedIn is a fabulous, has done a really great development job in bringing together a lot of, I'll call them tradespeople or other professions that would never have been able to be exposed to one another before. But it's also a double-edged sword, because guess what happens when they get together and talk? They're talking about you guys. So make sure that that you provide your employees with, we're getting into a little the culture stuff, but it's important that when they talk about you, or when a prospective employee gets on these kinds of sites and wants to find out about ABYC company or something like that, they're going to all of a sudden get attention from people within their trades that are part of these micro-organizations within LinkedIn. And that's where they're going to find out about you, good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, so whenever I prep candidates for interviews, I say, go crawl through the company's website, read about their company history and their team members, and know that website inside and out. But then go Google them, and let's not just find out what all the good news is on their website, but let's find out what others are saying about them, and go check out their Facebook page and customer reviews and this sort of thing. So to Chris's point, if your employees are out there having this sort of collaboration, make sure they're telling the story that you want to be told. James, do you guys use job boards?
We do. I mean, I concur with everything Chris just said. One thing I will say about Craigslist is that be very specific in what your ad states. Yeah. Generalities will will come back to bite you. But I do agree. Certainly, there's, with all the good, there's a little bit of bad. You do have the opportunity for bad news to follow one around, particularly, it's what Google does for us. So again, defining who you are and making sure your employees both grasp and agree with that message, and will transmit that message.
How many of us have an employee referral program within your company? In other words, you'll provide some sort of incentive for your staff to recommend hires, and most organizations that I work with do. Chris, you had one. You guys had a fairly robust one at Hatteras, I assume.
Yeah, almost every company that I've worked with over my career had one, because it was a real opportunity to get the people that work with you engaged in trying to build out that organization along the lines. They're not going to recommend bad people. They're always going to want to recommend the people that they know in the industry or friends of theirs that can bring something value added to the table. It doesn't make any sense for them to undermine what's going on in the company by recommending people that really wouldn't fit in or don't have the skill set or knowledge or capability that would require an extraordinary amount of training and so forth. So getting people to work through the process of recruiting and recommending, because there's some ethical issues that happen when somebody brings me a name of somebody. It's very difficult for me to go into one of our competitors and try to reach in and grab that guy out. Now, I can use a Neal to do that, but what we expect of the employees is that are recommending, that are using this tool, is that they do the work. They're the ones that are bringing the individuals to the table. So it eliminates that ethical conundrum that we often face as HR within our respective companies. It's got to be a process that's reinforced. It's got to be a process that you acknowledge when an individual brings somebody successfully to the table. That individual and that referral is acknowledged in some form or fashion. To reinforce the importance of that as a tool to fill out our ranks of excellent people within our organization.
Yeah, I mean, the saying is good people hang out with good people. So, and all these trades guys, by the way, hang out. I'll tell you an interesting story. In 2009, I was invited by Ralph Heil at Thunderbolt Marine to go down there and set up the beginnings of an apprenticeship program for Thunderbolt. And I was about 3 months on site. And about a month into it, their human resources manager came to me and she said, "Neal, we are dying for a marine electrician. We've been running ads. We cannot find the right person." And I said, "Well, I tell you what, after the break, would you mind if you and I went and met with that department, and we'll talk to the guys a little bit about it?" And she said, "Sure." So after the break, we went over there. I'll never forget this. She and I were sitting on one side of the table, and we had these 3 marine electricians sitting across from us. And I said, "You guys are aware that Thunderbolt needs a 4th team member?" And they're like, "Yeah, we really need the help. We could really use the help." I said, "Well, let me ask you each a question. How did you guys find your way to Thunderbolt?" And the first guy says, "Well, he told me about it. We used to work together down up the river at Hinckley, and he told me about it." And the next guy goes, "Well, this guy who used to work for, he told me about it." And then the third guy, of course, says the same thing. So all 3 were referred to the company, right? Didn't answer a job ad. All 3 were referred. And then I said, "Okay, well, let me ask you a second question. Let me ask you to do us a favor. Give me the name of 2 to 3 really good marine electricians you know of in the area that are working, whatever." And the first guy goes, "Well, there's Timmy Smith down at Hinckley." And the other 2 guys go, "Yeah, I know Timmy, sure, yeah, he's real good, real." And the second guy goes, and he reels off another name. And then the second guy reels off 2 or 3 names, and the third guy does the same thing. And they all knew these people, right? And so we left the room with like 6 names of marine electricians who I ended up contacted, and Thunderbolt actually ended up hiring 2 of these guys as a result of this effort. But again, it was a proactive effort. It wasn't a, hey guys, let me know if you can recommend anybody good for our marine electrical department, right? Because what happens is when you solicit referrals from your people, they have the mindset of, who do I know who's looking for a job? Okay? It's not, who do I know who's really good, who I might refer or go out and reach out to. We arrive at about 80% of our placements through referrals. I'll call a guy up at work, hey, you interested in this job? No thanks, I'm happy where I am, or I can't move, or whatever. Okay, can you recommend anybody good for it? And the majority, the overwhelming majority of the time, the answer to that question, when I say, could you recommend anybody good for it, they go, no, Neal, I don't know anybody who's looking. Okay? I'm not looking for anybody who's looking, and that's exactly what I say to them. I say, just give me the name of somebody good, and that's how you can promote an employee referral program. Most employee referral programs that I run into, most companies have them, but it's what I call a dormant program. It's just, hey guys, if you recommend good people, we'll give you a $50 gift certificate if we hire them. Okay? Go out and solicit names and ideas and help your people. Let them engage in the process as well. Any other comments on that, guys?
I think you covered
We
it.
have a quick question.
Yes.
Hey, good morning. I just want to see, what do you recommend for somebody putting a good referral program in place? Everybody here thinks it'd be great to put one in place, but how would they do it? How much money do you recommend giving somebody? How do you qualify the candidates working out? Do you take safety into consideration with it if the person's working the long term as a safe craftsman? And how long should the person be working before you actually give your employee the referral bonus?
All right, great question. And Chris, you and I discussed that, so, and you had a program, so why don't you answer that one?
Yeah, I mean, and I love that you even brought that question up, because any kind of an employee referral program, or any kind of a program that we have, you really have to really flesh out exactly the elements of that you need to communicate and you need to live by with your employees. And there's some tough stuff in this. An employee brings me an individual for a position that I have available. We go through the interview process and the individual is not successful and doesn't get an offer. Well, you have to make sure that you follow up with the employee that recommended and have a discussion with them that sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes they don't have the skills that we're looking for. Sometimes they don't have the character that we're looking for, or whatever. And answer your question, it really is fleshed out. Typically, if an individual is successful, they've gotten through the onboarding program and they're there for 6 months, we'll acknowledge both the individual and the referring with an award. And that award is literally given by the president at one of our all-hands meetings or something like that, which we held regularly. So,
Do you ever tie a monetary?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
they're almost all monetary
Oh,
awards.
they were, okay. All right, but that peer recognition, that standing up in front of the team.
Just continues to reinforce that whole process.
Right.
So we did a walking in the door, I mean, we'll talk about onboarding in a little bit, but I mean, it's really important for those referred individuals, that you acknowledge them as well as the employee that made the referral. Keep them involved in the process,
James,
particularly through that 6-month window.
You spoke of, I had asked you the question over the phone, how do you guys typically attract a lot of your people? And you said it was through employee referrals?
Yeah, a good deal of it is. I mean, I think recognition is certainly key to a program working properly, but having an employee make a referral, you have buy-in from the employee, you have a certain level of respect between peers when the guy walks in the door. Certainly, knowledge of that individual's work history is provided, osmotically to the rest of the shop, the guys who are already there. So you almost have a chemistry that's built up as soon as the guy comes on board, and that's particularly important for us because we're a relatively small company, and chemistry is everything. Hard skills are almost secondary in some cases because we believe we can teach those, but it's finding people who work well together, people with whom the basic company's philosophy, rests easy. And it's that overall chemistry which allows people to work together properly and over the long term all pull on the same end of the rope that's most important to us. Because the hard skills, as I said, you can largely teach those. But you can't teach chemistry.
Right. I'm going to move through these next few slides for time's sake because we do have a lot of content and Chris has got some great stuff to share at the end. Let's talk about qualifying candidates. So we've posted a job or a candidate's been referred by an incumbent employee, and so what do we do now? I think a big question to ask yourself as an organization is who's going to be responsible for the initial vetting, reviewing the resume, if you will. And you better make sure that you pick the right person and that person's qualified to do that job. Okay, because I've seen a lot of people that get to the face-to-face interview stage that should have never gotten there, but more often than not, I see a lot of people that slip through the cracks because somebody didn't know what they were looking for on a resume. They had a list of must-haves, must have this, and they couldn't read between the lines. All right, so make sure whoever that is, I recommend certainly the trade manager or the hiring authority for that department. If you're in a larger organization like Chris was with Brunswick, it's typically an HR function initially to do some of the pre-screening and then passing it along to the hiring authority for the department. I like to find out how the candidate learned about the position opening. Were they referred from somebody on our team, or did they answer a job ad? If they answered a job ad, it tells me something right out of the gate. Number one is they're looking for work. So why? Are they unhappy? Are they unemployed? Are they unqualified for the job because it's just so easy to click and send a resume these days? Okay. It also tells me if they applied via an online posting that this isn't the only job they've probably applied to. So if they're good, I better move on them pretty quick, or we may lose them. And this is a little one, but this just, again, I'm trying to understand right out of the gate the candidate, how was the resume sent? Was it sent in some WordPerfect software that I can't even open? Was it faxed over? Was it walked in? Again, it just gives me a little bit of background on who, or was it a nice clean PDF document with an attached summary, or was it, the guy sent me his whole CAD portfolio of, 16 attachments, and I want to begin to qualify the candidate a little bit just by knowing something as simple as how was the resume sent to me. We get about 50, 60 resumes a day, so I've got to be able to look through a resume in about 8 seconds. And I'll just tell you quickly some of the things I look for. Chris and I, we disagreed a little bit on this. He reads the entire resume top to bottom, and probably you should. He wasn't dealing with quite the volume I'm dealing with. But the 8-second resume to me, the first thing I want to know is where does the person live? Okay, and that's typically found in the heading. I look at dates of employment almost immediately, and I start looking for what I call job hoppers. When I first got into recruiting 17, 18 years ago, if the person held a position for less than 5, maybe 7 years, and they did that continuously through their career, we started to flag them as a job hopper. That's changed quite a bit in the last number of years. It's more like 2 to 3 years. But that person that was 6 months here, a year there, 6 months here, a year there, I'm starting to raise my red flags. And the last thing I look at pretty early on is education or training. And then also, what do they do outside of work? One of the things I recommend to people, I do a resume workshop a lot, and I'll travel around and I make recommendations about writing a resume. And I always tell people to add a hobbies and personal interest section sort of at the end of your resume, because I want to know more about the individual than just where you worked and what you did. I want to know that you're engaged in your community, or you're a coach for your kids' ball team, okay, or you volunteer at your church, or you're an avid triathlete, whatever it may be. Typical resume layout, I just highlighted some things here. I look for dollar signs on resumes. I want to know how you've impacted the organization that you've worked for. Okay, increased profitability, cost savings initiatives. Okay, and there's a couple examples here. And then what do you do with it? Okay, the resume is going to fall into one of 3 categories, the candidate is. Are we going to move on this person right away? And if so, who's going to pick up that process and how? And we'll get into that in a second. Is it a maybe? We're just not sure. And who's going to go out and qualify whether or not this person is going to move into the process, or is it a no, a letdown? And this is important. And I talked earlier about, one of the advantages of Craigslist is it's a sterilized ad, and they don't really know oftentimes who they're sending the application to. And so you don't feel as obligated to send a reply. But certainly, if you've listed your company name and they know to which company they've applied, send people a professional letdown. It's the right thing to do. It's a hard call to make when I got to let a candidate down, especially if they've been through the interview process, right? And they've gotten all the way to the altar, but we picked the other guy. Okay? It's not a fun call to make. But I can't tell you how many times we make that call and the person says, "Thank you so much for doing this." Or we'll even send it in an email. We have a scripted email signature that says, "Johnny, thank you for applying for the position. At this time, we have a few other candidates that we believe better align for the role. We'll keep your resume on file and contact you as future positions come along." That's a signature in our email. And every time we send it, the response is, "Thank you so much for sending this over. I've sent out countless resumes and nobody ever replies to me." And candidates are getting frustrated with that. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to stop sending out resumes. So have the professional courtesy to send every applicant that isn't going to make it a professional letdown. And Chris, you and I talked a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I can't add to that. I mean, you're absolutely right. Anybody that takes the time and effort, even though there's very little time and effort these days because of electronic, still respond.
But it speaks to your company's image electronically too. Yes. I mean, people talk, and treating people like human beings is a relatively easy thing to do.
Yeah.
So it's the right thing to do.
Great point.
Yeah, we've had many a candidate, fortunately not too many, but several instances, I should say, where we've called a guy up, and there's a note in my database that he was a candidate for a job 3 or 4 years ago, and we call him up, "Hey, I've got this position." "Well, Neal, what happened last time? You called me up and you said you had this position and you recruited me, and then I sent my resume over and I never heard from you guys. So, no thanks." All right, let's talk about the interview. Traditionally, there's been 2 types, telephone and face-to-face. I always advise that if the candidate's within a reasonable drive, a few hours, go ahead and bring them in for a face-to-face. Chris disagreed a little bit. You like to vet them over the phone, typically first?
Well, anybody that would show up at our facility, fill out an application or something like that, we made an instantaneous effort to get down there and at least shake their hands, greet them, talk with them for just a minute or two to get a little bit of background. But you're right. Once you're in this process, I typically contact them on the phone if they're local. I'll invite them in.
One of the changes that we're seeing in the recruitment business is the video interview. And we always say 5 minutes after the person walks through the door for the interview whether or not he or she is right for the position. Well, here's an opportunity to meet them face to face without having to make that investment in airfare and hotel and time and resources. If you're not using Skype or FaceTime as a platform to meet candidates, try it out. Okay? It's going to be a little funky in the beginning, and not all of us are comfortable speaking in front of a camera. And you have to understand that the candidate may not be comfortable either. But we do it for everybody that we present to our clients. I do a Skype video interview with them, every single person, all right? Because I want to see them, and I want to understand their style and demeanor and presence. And it's easy. And the guy or gal that says, "Well, I don't have Skype," it's a 10-second download. Okay, the only thing that you have to have is the hardware, the camera on the laptop, and most people do these days. One of the things that we're doing now is, with the candidate's permission, we'll record the session and then send it to our client and let them watch it. So imagine you got 5 hiring authorities for a position. You got an HR manager, you got the president, you got the engineering manager, whoever it may be, right? Now I can send them this 30-minute clip, and they can all sit in the conference room over coffee and watch this interview. And then they know right away, and I'll send them 2 or 3, and they say, "No, Neal, send Michael down here right away. He's the guy for sure." And no offense or disrespect to our clients, but I think oftentimes we're better interviewers than our clients are. So we ask the tough questions. Why'd you leave that job? How much are you making today? Oh, really? How is that structured? Is that base or performance? What's your motivation to consider a job change? How would relocation impact you and your family? So we drill on that side, and again, we just send the clip over. The phone interview, just some basics. You want to have a preset date, time, and phone number and who's going to initiate the call. Okay, we use that as a qualifier. If I tell a candidate, I'm going to call you tonight at 5:30 at this number, I'm putting this down on my calendar, Mr. Candidate, are you doing the same? Sure. And then I call him that night at 5:30 and I get voicemail, that's a red flag for me, obviously. Review the resume right before you make the phone call. Have questions prepared. I like to walk the candidate up the resume, meaning start at the bottom or on the back page and work your way to the current. You're going to spend less time, but hey, I see where you went to school, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Did you grow up there? Oh, no, I grew up. And I start from the beginning, and then the question, well, how'd you find your way to the marine industry? And how'd you get this job, and why'd you leave that job? What were you most proud of in this current job? And Chris, you alluded to when we spoke, you were talking about also understanding from the candidate what they're looking to do, their career goals.
Yeah. Typically, you know, a lot of these interviews are kind of one way. We're trying to find out about the individual, but that individual is doing little to find out about what the company is all about and how his needs can be met. So I think you gotta have a little bit of a dialogue on that as well, because that individual may be looking for things that you can't deliver.
I like to cover compensation very early on in the process because I've had a lot of deals there. We've gotten all the way to the altar, and we found out the candidate's making, $80,000 and the position pays $60,000, and there's no wiggle room, and we were just way off on numbers. So, and I like to ask the question, how is your compensation package structured? And it's more than just pay; it's the package. It's the vacation, okay? It's the company car, right? It's the relocation. These sorts of things. And again, I like to get to know the person, not just the candidate. What do you do for fun? What do you do outside of work? What are your hobbies and personal interests? And then discuss relocation, if applicable. The face-to-face interview, again, just some best practices. Book the flight early and book it smart. I can't tell you how many clients call us up and say, Neal, we want to bring Jimmy in for an interview. And I say, when? Tomorrow. And he's in Arizona and the position's in Florida. Well, it's not going to be particularly cost-effective to do it that way. Think about putting yourself in the candidate's shoes. If they've got to make a 3-hour drive to the airport, don't book them a 5 a.m. flight, right? Think about the hotel where you're putting them. Where is it in town? Is it reflective of the image that you're trying to portray with your organization? And create itineraries for the candidate and for anybody who might interview the candidate. Prep that candidate and prep your team. Assign interview topics. A lot of times I'll do interview debriefs with candidates, and I say, how'd it go? He said, Neal, it's great. I met 5 people, but they all told me the same story and asked me the same questions. Let HR cover HR stuff. Let the hiring manager for the department cover the duties and responsibilities, day in the life of type items. Let the president of the company be your closer. Think about asking behavioral-based interview questions. These are questions that begin with the statement, give me an example of a time when you, and then whatever it is, had to go back and tell a customer that you'd gone over budget on your quote, or had to deal with an insubordinate colleague. You know, when were you faced with an ethical decision in your company? Work the candidate up the organizational chart. Chris and I had a little bit of a difference of opinion here. I like to start by having the candidate interview with either HR or the department manager, and then if there's a VP, and then if there's the president. No need for the candidate to meet the president if he's not going to make it through these first couple of people.
I agree with that.
Yeah, well, right. I had skipped HR. What we talked about was the facility tour.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
I like to start interviews with a facility tour. To me, it's a nice icebreaker. You know, get the candidate walking, talking. It's a stressful event for them, so to lock them in a room with an interview by committee right out of the gate, unless that's the type of position that they're applying for, it's going to be a stressful, sales-intensive type role. Okay, but I like to give them some time to walk the facility a little bit, see and touch where they might be working. Don't neglect the spouse. If the spouse comes on the interview, make sure he or she has an itinerary as well. Okay, because if they don't, they'll get in the rental car and they'll drive to that side of town that you didn't want them to drive to, and then he or she will say, thanks but no thanks, and in the recruiting business, spouses kill all deals. All right, so make sure that you don't neglect the spouse. Yeah, it goes for boats too, right?
Yeah.
Make sure, I'm not going to spend time on illegal interview questions, but make sure your people understand what they can and can't ask in an interview. Reference checks, I just added this slide. A lot of us gloss over references because, you know, it's just part of the process, or we're going to extend the candidate an offer. Now let's do a reference check. Well, why are you doing it now? Do it early on in the process. I ask the candidates right away when I meet them to provide me the names of 3 to 5 supervisors, peers, and subordinates. Ask tough questions of the references. Questions like, if Mark came to you and you were his old boss and he came to you and said, tell me an area that I might improve in professionally, what would you have told him? That's a great way of asking what are Mark's weaknesses. All right? But be prepared to ask tough questions. And then an old headhunter trick is recruit the reference. If I'm looking for a paint shop foreman for my boat yard, and I ask a candidate to provide me 3 or 4 peers, guess what I just got? 3 or 4 more candidates, potentially. So the question is, towards the end of that reference check, you might ask the question, so how are things at your company? Have you considered change? And then close the interview with next steps. Let the candidate know what the process is going to look like moving forward. Stay close to that candidate during this interim. There's going to be some time from the time they interview until maybe at the time an offer is extended, and then the time an offer is extended until the time the person starts with you. And that's when these things tend to go sideways. Candidate goes in and gives notice at his current company, gets a counteroffer. You'll be the last person they call, because again, that's a tough call. They don't want to call you. So one thing we do is from the time a candidate accepts an offer until they start, it's an average 3 or 4 week time period in there. We call them once a week. And we just say, hey, Johnny, it's Neal. Just want to make sure everything's progressing. You got the moving truck all lined up. Did you get your benefits package? Have you done the drug screen yet? Is there anything I can do to help? Has anything changed since the last time we spoke? That's what we ask them, okay? Because if you don't, they're not going to call you up and tell you, oh, I received a counteroffer, and or my wife had a change of heart and doesn't want to move now. Stay close to that candidate. And then Chris is going to talk us through a little bit of an onboarding process. Chris, I said I'd leave you 15 minutes. I left you about 5. But the onboarding is key. I run into a lot of organizations where the candidate shows up for day one. He walks in the lobby, and Betsy greets him and says, may I help you? And his guy's like, yeah, I'm here to start my job. And she's like, well, who are you? And let me go. And, you know, it's this running around. All this stuff should be covered. And Chris is going to help us through that a little bit.
5?
5. Kitty, 5?
I'm going to skip through this relatively quickly because I think that some other parts of my presentation are equally, if not greater, in importance to what I think is a big issue, and that's retention. We've kind of talked about how do you attract people to the organizations that we have. More importantly, though, is once you get them, you know, once they're hooked, it's a wrong analogy, you still got to get them into the boat, and they're never going to be comfortable about being on the boat, so it's a wrong analogy. But the point being is that what you do from the point that you do get the hook in them will convince that employee not only does that individual matter, but it'll start addressing a lot of stuff that that employee needs to know about the company, about its culture, and where that individual might fit in. The failure rate I've experienced in bringing a new employee in has been phenomenal in some cases. Because what do? We bring them in, HR gets the individual, we take them through benefits enrollment and blah, 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 this and that and the other thing, and then dump them on the department. And the department really doesn't know what to do with them other than put them to work. And they're not ready to go to work, and they fail. So shame on us for doing those kinds of things, but what did I just do?
I don't know what you hit.
The arrow. So when you start thinking about your onboarding process, what do you do once the employee does accept the offer? You really have to start thinking through it as a process, not an event. It's going to go on for 3 to 6 months. It has to, because your organizations, regardless of the size of them, are still very complex. Processes, things that aren't communicated or articulated. And I'll just go through. Do I hit the arrow?
Yeah, I hope.
No. What am I doing wrong? Oh, okay, here we go. You want the employee to understand what is expected of them over that period of time as they go through the onboarding process. And believe me, this is not an educational process so much as it is, you know, that they're experiencing this in a classroom kind of an environment. It's part and parcel with the real work that they're going to be doing. And it's exposure to all of those kinds of things, their peers, other members of the organization. They're looking for a growth plan because they want to be challenged. They're coming to your organization for a reason. And hopefully you've already identified what that is. It's career opportunities. It's further training because your organization is known for that. It's the ability they know that they can get something out of this organization that they couldn't get out of the organization that they came from. This is a little difficult to do because you need to tie an individual into what to expect in the next 1, 2, or 3 years. And of course, the problem in doing that is once you get the employee thinking about goals over the next 1, 2, 3 years or something like that, you've got to be able to deliver to that because it sets an expectation, and if you don't meet those expectations or don't provide the associated feedback, an individual's going to be frustrated, and guess what? They're going to be walking out the door to somebody else to try it again. Get the new hire involved and productive as soon as you possibly can, because not only as a company do you need it, but the individual themselves need it. They don't want to sit in a classroom and, you know, they want to actually be doing what it is that they're supposed to be doing and achieving goals, getting results, growing, developing. Sorry. It's going to involve a lot of people, but when I say it involves a lot of people, it doesn't consume a tremendous amount of time. But what you do want to do is get people involved and engaged, from the president of the company all the way down to the peer groups of the individuals to whom they're going to have to network with. It all starts before day one. You got to have a plan in place that's plug and play as soon as they come in the door, and that may involve things. I'm sorry, it may involve things that you send out to employees to have them begin the process of integrating themselves into the organization, so that they're ready on day one to get involved in the onboarding process. And so that there shouldn't be tremendous amount of surprises for an individual coming into the organization. And it becomes a rather seamless process. Make sure you make an announcement to the organization before you bring an employee, and include their picture if at all possible. Send out a Chamber of Commerce kind of a piece that provides not only the employee but their spouse or kids some idea of really what the community that they're coming to is offering them as well. And make sure that you're prepared for the individual coming in the door, that you have lunches planned, that you have visits with the various different officers of the company or department managers and others in their peer group. We talked about the recruitment process. We need to look inside the company because this is what employees are evaluating you on, and this is one of the reasons why you're able to attract the kind of talent that you need to. Do you have a positive employee culture? I know that's esoteric, but it's important, and it becomes more important. This culture becomes more important to particularly the millennials, as we talked about earlier. They're looking for a place to belong, a place where they can receive training and development, where an organization cares. What's the cost of turnover? Why is this whole, onboarding and evaluating your company's goals and mission and your culture, why is it all important? Because the cost of turnover is huge. Whether you want to recognize it or not, it's very significant. We talked about the onboarding process, a new hire support process, such as a mentoring or I've heard it called coaching, other kinds of things, but it immediately creates an opportunity for an individual to begin their own network in their organization. 1.5, just cost of turnover, I'll go through this very quickly, is 1.5 to 2.5 times annual salary. Do you believe that? Even if you wanted to take a conservative approach of 60%, but these are the costs that you can incur in going through a replacement of an individual, and it's extraordinary. Recruiters, search fees, advertising, just the time it consumes in the hiring process, the onboarding, training, and so forth. The thing that you can't really do a very good job at measuring, which is huge, is this turnover becomes such that it really it affects the morale of an organization and those individuals that are engaged. And all of a sudden, you start seeing an individual go to another company that you knew, and he's having a very good experience with it. There is very good possibility you have an opportunity to lose that employee. The productivity. It takes quite a bit of time to get a new employee up to the same level of productivity that the exiting employee had. So how do you value that? I don't know. This is a biggie. What impact does it have on your revenue? Or can you even determine that? Because all of a sudden you have customers that aren't being serviced to the extent that they were previously. There's no continuity in terms of the relationship a lot of customers develop with the employees within this organization, and customer service could really have could take a hit. I want to talk, and this will be really quick because this afternoon, hopefully, a lot of you will attend, and I was gratified to see motivating your team to build a mission-driven culture. And I don't know who the presenter is, but for anybody to be thinking about this is vital to, as we talked about, to successfully attracting the kind of talent that you're looking for, to retain that talent, and on a very consistent basis. So there's really two parts to a mission statement. I have a prop. What's a presentation without a prop, right? That different organizations go through the process of defining themselves quite differently. And one of my best friends was involved in building a research and development company for the optics industry. And I sort of challenged him to go through this process years ago. And he did. And we went through, the importance of a mission statement and what it means to their people and so forth. And he, with a group of 25 to 35 engineers, came up with their mission statement. And the company's name was McMahon Research. Their mission statement was, "We build things that work." It's a little bit of a cliche, but it meant something to the people because they helped create it, and it meant something. It provided a direction for them. In my experience with mission statements, it typically defines what you are, your services that you provide, your products, or whatever. It talks a little bit about how you feel about those services and in terms of your customers, what their expectations are, and then it talks about who you are, what you represent. It talks about the beginnings of your culture, and what underlies that are the principles and values that you subsequently create that supports that mission statement. And that's, I hope, what this afternoon's breakout session is going to be about, because this is how you differentiate yourself in a very crowded employment world.
Okay, so We apologize, we ran a few minutes over, but there's obviously a ton of content. It's so critical to the success of your company. Your workforce, your people are your number one asset. Think about developing a process, just as you would any other process. Think it through, get the buy-in from your team members. Think about succession planning, and I'm not just going to hire because I've got a position open, but I'm going to think a little bit out about 3-5 years from now. Think about creative avenues to find talent, whether online or through partnering with trade schools and educational institutions. Get young people around boats. And then think hard about how, when you do get your people, how well you onboard them and what are you going to do to keep them. Any questions? Okay, James, yes, sorry.
Yes, thanks very much. My name's Ian Bone, representing Yacht Captains Association. I also write about yachting leadership. I note that there wasn't any discussion about the training of your internal staff to actually deal with the new millennials workforce coming through. The stuff that I've been reading lately about engagement of people in workforce, I think, is insightful. 13% of people are actually actively engaged in their organisations, and over double that are totally disengaged. I think engagement is a huge, huge problem for all organisations, and I don't doubt the yachting industry sits in that situation as well. So I think perhaps we really need to have a good look at how our leadership and our management within organisations actually engage employees. People are looking for progress. People are looking for development. People are looking for flexibility. They're looking for... The world of work has changed dramatically than what it was 20 and 30 years ago. And if we're expecting people to flock to our organisations and enterprises because we can give them a job, that's not sufficient anymore. We have to be doing more and more to actually engage our people. The second question or point I want to make is personality assessments. I think we would be well served as organisations to look in terms of now the new research that's being undertaken with regard to personality assessments, particularly in the team atmosphere. I think there are a range of assessment tools out in the market today, way beyond the old Myers-Briggs days, that can help organisations better select their staff and better place them in their teams. Hogan assessments being one of them, I think, is at the leading edge of personality profiling, and a number of other talent assessment organisations. People writing about, just go onto LinkedIn, you'll find a number of that sort of stuff that's happening. Emotional intelligence is one of those key aspects I think that people need to perhaps do some research on as well. So yes, just my few words. The industry perhaps could be well served to look at those couple of points.
Yeah, very good points. We have just a handful of clients, surprisingly, that use the assessments, the tools. Grady White does. It's the first part of their recruitment process or vetting process is they'll have a candidate take a series of 3 or 4 of them, and they will disqualify the candidate right out of the gate if they don't measure as they hope they would. Grady White also has an average tenure of 17 years for their management team. Okay, so they keep their people. It works. Regal does the same thing. Nautique Boats does the same thing. I think the larger corporate entities tend to do the measuring more so than the privately held or smaller companies.
Yes, that's probably true. Good points, by the way, and you're absolutely right. And I didn't get to the back end of this presentation because we kind of ran out of time, but all of those kinds of elements that you talked about need to be knitted into your culture, and every single one of them has to be worked on a consistent basis. You talked about training your staff to make sure that they're supportive of those kinds of things. Yes, absolutely. That's an element of it. They have to understand it, they have to buy into it, and they have to agree to it before you can really take it at large anyway. Because if there's no buy-in there, guess what? Yeah, how do you sell something that really doesn't have any teeth to it within the organization? So,
I mean, I agree completely. The point you make about dealing with millennials, I mean, their culture is different. And we've got a graying workforce, as we said. Having those people who are looked upon to be mentors now for millennials coming in, it's a slightly different track. I mean, it's a slightly different way of dealing with people. As to the assessment tools, again, I come back to what I said earlier on. We're a small organization, so chemistry is everything. However, how you come to find that compatibility, whether it's through assessment tools or through just gut, which is a dangerous thing to do. But that inherent compatibility is what you're seeking so that you can have a long-term employee and a management team, as you've just alluded to. Long management teams tend to work well together over a long period of time to the success of their organization. The less throughput you have at higher levels, the better off that organization is going to be in 5 and 6 and 7 years out.
Any other questions, comments? Again, we're up against a little bit of a time window here. Thank you for your patience. On behalf of James and Chris, thank you for your attendance, and thank you guys for your contributions. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.